Hello my friends, with the release of Shadow of the Erdtree now upon us, I wanted to take this opportunity to address a lot of lies and misinformation that have been spread about the DLC. So, as you're going through this video, if any of this information sounds familiar to you, go and tell your friends, go and rant on Reddit at that person who was arguing with you and say, look, you were wrong, it doesn't work like that, stop spreading misinformation. I really hoped there wouldn't be a need for a video like this, but people are going to be entering into the DLC with some drastically incorrect knowledge, and it could potentially severely harm your enjoyment of the DLC if you don't know these things. So please pay attention, because I have said almost all of this information before, and people are still trying to spread lies and false information, and it's really going to ruin a lot of people's first playthroughs. This video will be broken down into 5 chapters, which will be clearly linked below in the description. But for your convenience, as you'll see, they are when you will acquire some of the new weapons and abilities that you've been seeing in the previews, how leveling actually works, the difficulty of the DLC, the new mechanics, and finally interactions with the base game. One last thing before we jump into the first section, don't worry, I will keep this completely spoiler free. I'm not going to be naming anything that you haven't already seen from the pre-release events. So without further ado, let's jump straight into chapter 1. Let me start off by saying that quite a few of the weapons and abilities and spells that you have seen so far in both the preview event a few weeks ago and also the live stream event a few days ago are not in the early game. Please do not get your hopes up about using lots of these weapons early, as some of them you won't acquire until 30 hours into your playthrough. In fact, one of them that a lot of people are really excited about, you don't get until the final dungeon that you will probably encounter around 60 hours into your playthrough, right before the final boss. One key example people are absolutely desperate for is the Milady Light Greatsword, specifically with the Wings Stance Ash of War. Not only is this weapon pretty well hidden and will be quite hard to reach until you've been playing for around 10 or 15 hours, something that we have not been allowed to say up until this point is it doesn't actually come with Wing Stance. It just comes with a very generic Impaling Thrust Ash of War. It's a very basic light greatsword, and the really cool moveset that people think it comes with is actually tied to the Ash of War Wing Stance. So please note, even when you do find your first light greatsword, you may be a little bit disappointed until you can start to apply the really cool abilities to them. Luckily, if you do want to search for the Ash of War Wing Stance, it isn't too much further into the game than Milady. And of course, I am here with my Things You Missed series to help you find things like this, so make sure you subscribed and stay tuned for more videos helping you through your first playthrough. And at time of recording, I have acquired over 90 of the 100 stated new weapons, so I feel like I've pretty much explored everything by this point. So I should be able to help you out with any new thing you want to get your hands on. Another example is the heavy Smith Script Great Hammer, which you can wind up and then launch at your enemies, only to have it reappear back in your hand again. I admit this is one of the coolest things I had ever seen. So when I found out it was not only in the very last area of the game, but also at the bottom of a very well hidden dungeon, and that you likely won't acquire this until just before the final boss after around 100 hours of playtime, I was devastated. However, please do note, as the light at the end of the tunnel, now that I am so savvy with the DLC, there are lots of hidden paths and lots of ways around certain areas, so you can get to this hammer pretty early on, but it requires very intricate knowledge of the DLC. So coming soon, I am going to do a mini series of videos where I help you acquire the most awesome stuff in the game as fast as possible, so you can just beeline there and grab this for the start of your playthrough and actually play most of the DLC with your favorite weapons, so that you can bypass this tedium and get stuck in straight away. So please keep these things in mind, my friends. Long story short, please limit your expectations in regards to all of the new awesome cool stuff that you can acquire. There are only on average 3 weapons for each of the new weapon category types, and you'll only find 1 of each of them for a very long time into your playthrough. Your best bet is to go in viewing your first playthrough of the DLC as your collectibles playthrough. This is when you're going to find everything, and by the end, you'll have all the tools you were hoping to have. And then you can jump into New Game Plus once you finish the base game and go through the entirety of both the base game and the DLC with all of these new awesome cool weapons, abilities, and spells. Next up is how the leveling system actually works. Even though, again, I have explained this multiple times now, many people keep spreading misinformation and lies about how it works, with two main lies that I keep hearing again and again. Firstly, a lot of people are saying that enemies scale based on your level, meaning that you're making it harder for yourself if you go in at a higher level. This is simply not true. And the other main one being that people are saying the complete opposite, and that your level doesn't matter at all, and that actually the Erdtree fragments and the Erdtree blessing are the only mechanic that will impact your damage dealt and received. Again, all of this is complete garbage. Though I have explained it before, let me explain again now in even further detail so you know exactly how it works as you prepare to head into the DLC. Firstly, the Erdtree fragments that you acquire to increase your Erdtree blessing only impact the damage you deal and the damage you receive. They do not impact your health, your FP, your arcane, your discovery, your stamina, your equip load, your mind. Near enough, every other stat in the game is unaffected by the Erdtree fragments and the Erdtree blessing. So obviously, going in at a higher level is going to make the DLC far easier. And next up, no, there is absolutely no kind of level scaling. If you go in at the maximum level, you're going to have a far, far easier time than someone that goes in at level 150. The DLC is still really hard, so it doesn't guarantee victory even if you are max level, but I'll talk about that in the next section in just a second. For now, please know all builds are viable and all levels are viable. If you go in and try to not use the Erdtree blessing mechanic, it is going to be insanely tough. You will die many times, and some bosses will feel almost impossible. But is it doable? Yes. So all builds are viable, all levels are viable. Ignore people trying to tell you that enemies scale, and ignore people trying to tell you that your level doesn't matter. These things simply are not true. Next up, I want to talk to you about the difficulty. Most of the bosses are surprisingly easy. Like genuinely easier than most of the bosses in the base game, especially if you come in with a really full, fleshed out build. I was able to bonk most bosses to death in around 10 hits. However, there are two exceptions. There are two bosses that are really difficult. There is no new Millennia, i.e. there is no new ultra hard optional super boss. The only two bosses that are insanely hard are both mandatory. One of them I would say is easier than Millennia, but still really hard. And the other one is absolutely insane. Like genuinely one of the toughest bosses I've ever fought in any From Software game ever. Like they will genuinely destroy you time and time again until you get good. And it took me countless hours to beat them. I'm not going to tell you where these bosses are or give you any indication as to who they are, but just know that there are two roadblocks in the DLC. They're crazy tough, but the rest of them pretty much pushovers. However, on the flip side, as we talk about all your regular enemies, even with maxed out Erdtree blessing and a really good build, you are going to die frequently. That is just a fact. Even trash mobs can really pack a punch and will destroy you in somewhere between 3 to 6 hits, depending on how tanky your build is. And if you get surrounded by a few enemies, it's more or less usually guaranteed instant death. Some of the new attacks they use are disgusting, and not only do they do loads of damage, but they're very effective at stun locking you. So you need to treat every encounter like a mini-boss, and be on your guard at all times. Another reason for the need to be on your guard at all times is that now, more than ever, the open world is so open. And there are many wandering packs of enemies ready to ruin your day and jump in on a fight. Also add to this that in certain areas, sites of grace are now far fewer than they were before, meaning you will have a lot of work to do catching up to where you were every time you die. So please be extra careful. Again, some more false information I keep hearing spread around is that along with the new mechanics, everything new is exclusive to the DLC. This isn't true. Items, cookbooks, crafting materials, weapons, abilities, spells, the list is endless. Every one of these things I've just listed, you can also use in the base game with no restrictions at all. One thing of note though, is this does mean that you may be shocked by how little damage some of these new weapons seem to do in the base game. Don't worry, they're not really underpowered. This is just because they're no longer under the effects of the Erdtree blessing, and you may be quite surprised at exactly how much extra damage that was making you do. And just so there's absolutely no confusion, that also applies to all base game weapons. They do increased damage in the DLC, but normal damage in the base game. This is just a way to make sure that you don't suddenly become really overpowered in the base game, with all of the new DLC weapons just being ridiculous. In fact, they're all just as normal and balanced as everything else, just with some new, really cool mechanics, skills, and abilities. However, as I say, you definitely can and should bring all of your new awesome equipment back to the base game with you. I, for one, am really looking forward to doing a Messmer cosplay playthrough, where I exclusively use Messmer's equipment, weapons, and spells. Or even a DLC-only playthrough, where I have already finished the game and got all of the new DLC equipment, and then I go back into New Game Plus, and I kill all 250 plus bosses in the base game and the DLC, using exclusively things I have acquired from the DLC during my first playthrough. In fact, now I say it out loud, that's one I'm really excited for, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for a variety of Shadow of the Erdtree content. And finally, hopefully for lore enthusiasts and completionists among us, there will be some hidden interactions, secret voice lines and new cutscenes based on the order of things you do in the base game and the DLC. In fact, I'm almost certain there will be, because there has been in most of FromSoft's other games, even if it's just a tiny voice line or a new cutscene before a boss. But for the most part, the DLC is in fact an entirely separate entity. So you do not need to worry about messing anything up in the base game and having it affect the DLC, or the other way round, based on your choices. You can complete whatever you like in any order, and for the most part it has absolutely no bearing. The only thing you do need to make sure you do is beat Radahn and Mohg in the base game first, and then go and interact with the Empyrean Cocoon at Mohg's boss arena. That is how you access the DLC. It's as simple as that. With that, my friends, you are now fully prepared for what the DLC does and doesn't have to offer, so you're not going in over expecting anything. But please don't get me wrong, even though I have just said everything I've said, I still believe this is FromSoft's best DLC to date. It's absolutely incredible. You're going to love all the new stuff. So with that, my friends, all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.